What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo. So today I'm bringing to you my top 5 meta decks for the October 2020 format. We just had the conclusion of the Luxury Championship Series number 6, and frankly, this is probably going to be the only big tournament we have this month. There are going to be some other people maybe trying to throw tournaments, but you know, that's kind of just the reality of COVID Yu-Gi-Oh! There really isn't many major tournaments occurring. However, the big piece of information to take away from this video is that this is kind of going to set the trend for at least how the meta is going to evolve throughout the month, because now that we have a good gamut of good players that played against one another, bringing what they thought to the table was the best deck of the format, we're going to be able to take those trends and kind of analyze them moving forward as we go deeper into the month. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So kicking things off with number 5, I actually have a very interesting pick because I think this slot is very up for debate at the moment because there are other decks that are really fighting for it, but I'm going to go ahead and give this one to Eldritch. Now, the reason I say that is because, first off, looking at the LCS 6 results, Eldritch did have one spot in the top 16. Now, obviously, you can't really have that sort of results-oriented thinking, but the reason for this, too, is because if you look at the data over on YGOscope, it actually shows that Eldritch has about a 57 to 58% win rate at the moment in ranked competitive matches, and so when you look at that in totality compared to some of the other decks, it's actually performing rather well, even though it doesn't have the highest representation of all the other decks. There's definitely other decks that are being played at a higher frequency than Eldritch, especially since, you know, Jet Synchron got hit, Mecha Fan Beast Align. People are kind of having to re-engineer the deck once again because Eldritch has gone through so many evolutions at this point since it was initially released in Secret Slayers. But the thing is, I think people are starting to finally maybe figure out what works. I mean, we saw the 60 card amalgamation that managed to make its way into the top cut of the LCS, and who knows, maybe that's the new direction for Eldritch. I can't really say for sure, but Eldritch at its core just seems so powerful to me, especially when you look at it compared to like some of the other decks that might be vying for this spot. You know, you're kind of putting this up against decks like Salamangreat, which has a higher representation but doesn't have the best win rate, and then like Altergeist has a better win rate but just barely, and it has about the same level of frequency of play as a deck like Eldritch. So all three decks are kind of like fighting for this number 5 slot in my eyes, but I think Eldritch just kind of edges out the other two just because it does have some very unfair elements to it and can still play in this particular metagame rather well. You know, there's still plenty of variants of Eldritch you can play, like the Invoked Eldritch variant, the Dogmatica Eldritch variant. Hell, you can just merge them all together and just play another just Frankenstein of an Eldritch deck, or you know, you can just play some sort of crazy spam combo Eldritch variant, which I'm sure still exists because we saw it do well at the LCS, and again, we don't know if that's the direction Eldritch is going to take, but there's so many different adaptations and things that Eldritch can kind of mold itself to that I have high hopes that this deck is still going to be sticking around and you're still going to be seeing a decent amount of it, even if it might not necessarily be winning all of these events. So for those reasons, that's why I put Eldritch as my number 5 spot. But coming in at number 4, this one's for you control players out there because you are going to absolutely love this one, and that deck is Invoked Dogmatica. And the reason for this is mainly because it took first place at the LCS 6, fighting its way through all the different combo decks, all the other top contenders that we're going to be discussing in this list, and this was not only the only one that was in the top 16, but it managed to take first place. Now, what's interesting about this deck is that it is very old school cookie cutter Yu-Gi-Oh! And what I mean by that is you're really just trying to play for the board, you're trying to just get simple +1 and simple advantage generation to be able to have just more card advantage than your opponent and just win through sheer attrition at that point. And that's really the name of the game when it comes to any control deck, but Invoked Dogmatica does it so well. One of the big strengths of Invoked Dogmatica in particular, especially in a combo heavy meta, is the fact that you have a card like El Shaddoll Window, which you can summon off Shaddoll Schism, which is very easy to access in this deck, and if you're going first, you can establish that, and if you do, you probably just win the game. There's not really much your opponent can do. It's very difficult for these combo decks to be able to out a window, especially a window with protection, mind you. And so that's just going to make your game 1 super easy. And then game 2 is going to be a little bit more difficult, but even then it's not impossible because these decks have the tools to be able to fight back, whether they're going first or second. I mean, triple tactical talents is a hell of a Yu-Gi-Oh card, being either Pot of Greed, Forceful Sentry, or best of them all, Change of Heart. And the reason I say best is because especially as a going second tool, that added flexibility is so nice because then you can take your opponent's biggest threats and use them against them. The crazy thing about Invoke Dogmatica is that it's not using these absurdly broken cards like Crystron Halki-Fibrax and Linkross, and yet it is still able to compete with some of these top tier combo decks, and I think that's incredible. And so maybe if you're not looking to play those super heavy combo decks, or maybe you prefer to play control, this is definitely gonna be the deck for you. So for those reasons, that's why I gave Invoke Dogmatica my number 4 spot. Now coming in at number 3, we have a deck that you might not expect to be this low on the list, as a matter of fact, and that deck is Infernoble Knight. Now this may come as a shock to a lot of you, but I actually think there's another deck that just slightly ekes this out for the second place slot, but we'll go ahead and talk about that in a little bit. Let's go ahead and start with Infernoble Knight. It's really no surprise to see Infernoble Knight doing so well. This was a deck that a lot of people were anticipating was going to be one of, if not the best deck of the format, and people are really starting to experiment with this strategy. I mean, we saw at the LCS 6, players were trying to incorporate True King of all Calamities, level 9, rank 9 spam combo engines into their Infernoble Knight deck to kind of deviate away from like the traditional Boarload Savage Infernoble Knight Charles setups, and I think that's incredible. The fact that there's this level of ingenuity, especially now that cards like Jet Synchron and Mecha Phantom Beast Lion are banned, it's cool to see the kind of new adaptations and modifications that these decks have to make in order to be able to stay at the top tier. But even if you're playing a more traditional style of Infernoble Knight deck, it's still absurdly broken if it is able to go off. I mean, this deck has one of the highest win rates in the online environment as it currently stands, according to the data from YGeoScope, and just being able to see the combos and the boards that this deck is able to produce when you have cards that are able to rip cards out of your opponent's hand, I mean, that's always fun and unfair, right? But the thing is, I mean, these combo decks are just incredibly powerful, and they don't even rely on tools like Called by the Grave, which was limited on the most recent ban list, because they're able to, through the will of their own power, be able to play through these cards if they have enough extenders to be able to do so. These combo decks are definitely what you have to look out for if you plan on playing any sort of competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, whether it's online or, you know, in person if your local card shop does happen to open up. But Infernoble Knight is not going anywhere anytime soon. It's weird. It's almost like Halki-Fibrax and Linkross are the problem, right? But nonetheless, Infernoble Knight is not going anywhere anytime soon, and so for those reasons, that's why I gave it my number 3 spot. But coming in at number 2, oh man, some of you guys have been waiting for this for years, but that time has finally come because that deck is Dinosaur. Absolutely. Dinosaur, I think, has definitely earned its place in this number 2 slot. And this is really cool. I mean, I don't think we've ever seen Dinosaur be in a position where it is this powerful, but this deck is just absolutely obliterating in the online environment. Dinosaur just is able to do so many powerful and unfair things. And when a deck is able to either go first or blind second and do really well either way, you know you have a very powerful deck on your hands. We saw at LCS 6 that Dinosaur took up about a quarter of the top 16 slots, and people were playing both going second and going first variants, and honestly, both are incredible, because if you're going second, you can just play all the best hand traps in the game, slow your opponent down from playing, which is especially powerful when we have these just outrageously absurd combo decks running around. And then if there's a deck that can OTK, it's Dinosaur, because getting to 8,000 could not be easier, and it is very easy for this deck to be able to amass a huge board and just completely overrun your opponent. Even Ultimate Conductor Tyranno just by itself is so incredibly efficient at being able to clean up opposing combo players' boards, because if there's an opening or you're able to bait out all of your opponent's negations, the last thing you have to do is just drop Tyranno and he can just eat up the entire board with complete ease. And the fact that you have a boss monster that is not only searchable, but just has such a built-in powerful effect, like what more could you really ask for? And even going first, your going first boards are still pretty good. You're ending on stuff like Ultimate Conductor Tyranno plus Evil Czar Dolka, which is like very difficult for a lot of decks to play through. We've even seen some decks recently trying to incorporate the Cimoooooooo Link monster to special summon Barrier Statue of the Stormwind to kind of just have like this sort of auto win game 1 that if your opponent can't out it, then you just automatically win the game. I talked a lot about Dinosaur more in depth in my recent meta-analysis video that I just uploaded recently, so you guys can check that out because there are some really cool techs that these Dinosaur players are incorporating, and man, I just love that Dinosaur is finally at the top tiers of competitive play, and it is finally one of the most feared decks because it 100% deserves it. This deck is going to be everywhere. It is already overrunning the online environment, and you can expect that October is definitely going to be dinosaur season. And so for those reasons, that's why I gave Dinosaur my number 2 spot. And that's going to bring us to my number 1 meta deck of the October 2020 format. And if you haven't already figured it out, I don't know what platform you've been playing on, but Dragon Link is absolutely everywhere. You know, when there's a deck that is able to play through cards like Nibiru and Gamma and still be able to end on a board that can disrupt your opponent, you know that that deck is good. Dragon Link is just astonishingly powerful. I mean, being able to do the things that it's able to do, and the fact that, mind you, this deck was completely unscathed on the most recent September 2020 ban list. Yeah, you could argue that like the Halki Fibrax tuners did technically hurt this deck a little bit, but not really. I mean, this deck suffered no hits whatsoever, and it's no surprise that as soon as people saw the list, they immediately thought that Dragon Link was the best deck. Dragon Link currently boasts the highest win rate in the online environment at about 70%, which is insane. That is so incredibly high. That's such a great success rate for anyone looking to play it. And when you see that players are starting to incorporate cards like Droll and Lockbird, or going back to stuff like Gizmek Uka, or just all of these like contingency hand traps that like really never see the light of day unless the format is starting to go in a very dangerous direction, yeah, you can bet that people are going to pull out all the stops to find every single way imaginable to stop this deck. What makes Dragon Link so powerful is the fact that you're able to assemble the boards that you can that are able to pretty much win you the game by themselves off of a single card, or maybe like 2 cards in some instances, or if you get disrupted, just having a single extender can just put you back in the driver's seat and get you exactly to where you want to be. Again, people play these circuit breaker type hand traps like Nibiru, like Gamma, like Droll and Lockbird, when stuff like Ash Blossom or Effect Veiler just aren't cutting it because they're so low impact by comparison, because those cards don't remove the monster from the field, and Dragon Link is able to capitalize on that in a way that really not many decks do. But sometimes it's not even enough, because Dragon Link players have already begun altering their strategies to accommodate some of the new hate that their deck is starting to get, and starting to even play around stuff like Droll and Lockbird by reducing the amount of cards that are going to add cards to their hand, and rather get cards that maybe special summon those monsters to the field so that they can bypass Droll and Lockbird, really being a choke point for their deck. So when the decks are still evolving even to the point where they can play around some of these other hand traps that a lot of people rely on to be able to compete, I mean, that's just extraordinary. And don't even get me started on going second. These decks can easily assemble a Borrelsword Dragon through multiple pieces of interruption, because they're able to get so many different monsters onto the field through so many different means, and that's really what you want in a combo deck. You know, people were really afraid of Adamancipator last format, and that was for good reason, but honestly, I think Dragon Link's just going to be the new Adamancipator, at least for the time being. We'll have to see how the format progresses, but man, Dragon Link is going to absolutely overwhelm the format, and this is definitely going to be the deck to beat. So you better ensure that you have your side deck or maybe even main deck plan in place to combat this deck, because if not, that deck is going to completely obliterate you. And for those reasons, it's really no surprise that Dragon Link is my number 1 meta deck of the October 2020 format. But guys, those are just my thoughts. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you found this video helpful, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member. Just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.